I threw a glass of ice water in my own mother's face and told her she wasn't my mother anymore. And a man in white clothing watched the whole thing happen from across my street, though I wouldn't understand what that meant until 3 days later when he was standing in my own living room. My name is Fazana Sullivan. I'm 41 years old, and this is my testimony. The ugliest thing I have ever done to another human being, and the mercy that undid it before it was too late. I'm telling you all of it, every detail that makes me look exactly as small as I was, because the only reason this story matters is the truth of how far I fell and who reached down for me anyway. If this is already landing somewhere in your chest, hit the like button before I go further. It helps this find the people who need to hear it tonight. And tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I read every single one. My mother's name is Rokeya Islam. She's 67 years old, and for most of my childhood, she was the only thing standing between my brothers and me and real hunger. I need to take you back to the beginning because you won't understand how a daughter gets cruel enough to throw water in her own mother's face unless you understand everything my mother gave up to raise me in the first place. My parents came to Hamtramck, Michigan from Bangladesh in the early 1980s, part of the wave of Bengali families who settled into that little city inside Detroit, drawn by factory work and a growing community of people who spoke their language and prayed in the same small storefront mosques. My father, Karim, worked construction, framing houses and pouring foundations all over Wayne County. My mother stayed home raising the three of us until I was 9 years old, when a scaffold my father was standing on gave way 15 stories up on a job site downtown, and he was gone before the ambulance even arrived. My mother was 39. I was the oldest at 9. My brother Rafiq was 6. My youngest brother Sabir was only 3. I don't think most people understand what it actually looks like when a woman with no education past the 8th grade, no English beyond what she'd picked up from television, and no family left in this country suddenly becomes the only thing keeping 3 children fed. My mother woke at 4 every morning to fry pita and samosas she sold out of a cooler on the corner of Joseph Campo and Canif before the sun was even fully up. By 7, she was on a bus to Grosse Pointe or Bloomfield Hills to clean houses for families who paid her in cash and rarely looked her in the eye. By mid-afternoon, she was home doing other women's laundry in a tub in our cramped little kitchen. At night, after we were in bed, she sewed piecework for a garment contractor who paid her pennies a seam, her fingers pricked and calloused, her back curved forward a little more every single year from all of it. Her hands filled with calluses, her knees swelled from years of scrubbing other people's floors, and she never once complained, not where we could hear it. God, she'd pray every night before bed, kneeling on a threadbare janamaz in the corner of her room. Give me the strength so my children don't suffer the way I've suffered. Let them have an education. Let them have a better life than mine. And somehow, against every odds stacked against a widow with 3 kids and no safety net, we never went hungry. There were always lentils and rice on the table, even on the nights she went to bed with nothing but the broth herself. I was different from the start, and I knew it even as a little girl. I had a hunger in me that had nothing to do with food, an ambition that felt like a fire I couldn't put out. And somewhere very young I decided I was not going to end up like my mother. I wasn't affectionate with her. I rarely hugged her back when she reached for me. When my school friends came over, I was ashamed of our apartment, the peeling paint, the bathroom we shared with 2 other families down the hall. "Mom," I'd say, annoyed, "why can't we have a nice house like Ashley's? Why does it always smell like fried onions in here?" My mother would only smile sadly and stroke my hair. "Someday, my love," she'd say. "Someday you'll have everything you deserve. I'll see to it." And she kept that promise, more completely than I ever deserved. When I graduated high school with honors, my mother worked double shift cleaning offices at night just to help cover my books and bus fare so I could attend Wayne State University on the scholarship I'd earned. I studied business, graduated with honors, landed a job at a marketing firm downtown, and one evening I came home with news that would change everything. "Mom, I met someone," I told her, with a smile she hadn't seen on my face in years. "His name is Craig Sullivan. He owns 3-car dealerships out in the suburbs." My mother felt joy and fear in the same breath. Joy because her daughter had found someone. Fear because of what she saw in my eyes when I said his name. Ambition, not love. Craig was 52 when we married, divorced with 2 kids from his first marriage, handsome, successful, and completely used to getting exactly what he wanted. I was 29 and I saw him as my ticket out of every crack paint apartment and cash-only cleaning job I'd ever grown up around. We married 6 months later at a country club in Bloomfield Hills, the kind of wedding my mother could never have imagined. 300 guests, an orchestra, a cake that cost more than she used to make in half a year. My mother came in the same modest hijab and shalwar kameez she wore to Juma prayers because she had no money for anything new. I barely introduced her to my new circle of friends that night, and when I did, I called her my mother with a coldness that had nothing warm left in it at all. After the wedding, Craig and I moved into a 5-bedroom colonial on a gated street in Bloomfield Hills with a pool, a tennis court, and a garage that held 5 cars worth more than everything my mother had earned across her entire working life. She only saw that house once in the beginning when I needed help unpacking. "Come help me, Ma," I told her over the phone, and she arrived thrilled, thinking her daughter was finally inviting her into this new life. She spent the whole day unpacking boxes, organizing my enormous new kitchen, scrubbing counters that were already clean because she didn't know how else to be useful in a house like that. At the end of the day, when it was getting dark and she was clearly hoping I'd offer her a glass of water or even ask her to stay for dinner, I handed her a $20 bill. "Thanks for your help," I said, the same way you'd thank a cleaning lady. I saw something break behind her eyes, but she took the money because she needed it, and she walked to the bus stop alone in the dark, crying the whole way home. That was the day I started disappearing from her life for good. I stopped answering her calls as often. I stopped visiting. Every excuse sounded reasonable in my own head at the time. "I'm busy, Mom. I have an important meeting. Craig and I have plans." The months turned into years. My brother Rafiq moved to Houston for an oil industry job and called our mother maybe once a month. My youngest brother, Sabir, died in a motorcycle accident on I-75 when he was 26, and the grief nearly destroyed what was left of my mother. And then, at 67 years old, my mother found herself completely alone in the world, with only her small widow's Social Security check, barely $900 a month to cover rent on a tiny studio in Hamtramck, her diabetes medication, her blood pressure pills, and whatever food was left over after all of that. It was never enough. It was never close to enough. She started eating once a day, then every other day. Her neighbors sometimes brought over a plate of food, but she was proud and hated asking. God, she prayed every night. Just give me strength for one more day. That's all I ask." And God seemed to be silent, or maybe he was preparing something far bigger than she could have possibly imagined. The morning of October 3rd came in gray over Hamtramck. My mother hadn't eaten in 2 days. Her hands shook with weakness. Her legs barely held her up. She looked in the small cracked mirror over her sink and saw a stranger looking back, hollow-eyed, cheekbones sharp, lips cracked. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered to the empty room. "I have to ask Farzana. She's my daughter. She can't refuse me a plate of food." She put on the same worn hijab she'd worn to my wedding, the same one she'd used to carry me as a baby all those years before, and she walked nearly 2 hours under the October sun all the way to my gated neighborhood in Bloomfield Hills. The security guard at the gate, a young man in his 20s, looked at her with open suspicion from inside his air-conditioned booth. "Who are you here to see, ma'am?" "My daughter, Farzana Sullivan. She lives at the house on the corner," my mother answered, her voice already trembling with exhaustion. The guard raised an eyebrow. He knew Mrs. Sullivan, who always arrived in her white Mercedes with designer sunglasses and a Louis Vuitton bag. This elderly woman in a worn hijab and sandals didn't look like she belonged anywhere near that name. "Let me call up there," he said, skepticism thick in his voice. He dialed the house. It rang several times before I picked up. "Yes," I answered, annoyed at being interrupted. "Mrs. Sullivan, there's a woman down here at the gate who says she's your mother," the guard said. There was a long, tense silence on my end. "What does she look like?" I asked, my voice going cold. "Older woman, hijab, looks like she's walked a long way," the guard said. "Tell her I'm not here," I said, and hung up before he could respond. The guard relayed the message as gently as he could, but my mother's face crumbled anyway. "Please, young man," she said, tears already starting. "Just tell her I only need a little food. I haven't eaten in 2 days. Just that." The guard, moved by the desperation in her voice, called the house again. "Mrs. Sullivan, she says she just needs some food. She hasn't eaten in 2 days." I felt something ugly rise up in me that I still can't fully explain even now, even having lived through everything that came after. "That woman is trying to embarrass me in front of my neighbors," I said. "Let her in. I'll give her what she deserves." The guard opened the gate. My mother walked through that beautiful, manicured neighborhood like a ghost, past homes that each looked like small palaces, past neighbors watering their lawns or washing their cars, who stared at her like her poverty might be contagious. One woman in yoga pants actually took out her phone and snapped a photo, like my mother was some kind of exhibit. My mother reached my front door and rang the bell, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might give out right there on my porch. I opened the door already furious, already ashamed, already every bit the monster I was about to become fully. "How dare you come here?" I snapped before she could even speak. "Farzana, please, I'm only. Don't call me that." I cut her off, glancing around to make sure no neighbors were watching. "Get inside before someone sees you." I grabbed her arm and yanked her through the doorway, slamming it behind us. And it was there, in my marble entryway, under my crystal chandelier, surrounded by expensive artwork I didn't even understand, that everything I'd been suppressing for years came pouring out in the worst possible way. "What do you want?" I demanded, arms crossed. "Daughter, My mother could barely speak through hunger and heartbreak. "I haven't eaten in 2 days. Just some food, whatever you have, some rice, anything." I laughed, an ugly, bitter sound. "Are you actually here begging for food like some kind of homeless woman?" "I'm not begging, I'm your mother. I'm only asking." "You're not my mother," I screamed, and in her eyes I saw a kind of pain I'd never once let myself witness before. "I made myself. What did you ever give me? Poverty, shame, a house that always smelled like fried onions. Please." My mother started crying now. "I worked my whole life so you could have an education, so you could." "Shut up." I climbed the stairs, my whole body shaking with a rage that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with every insecurity I'd ever buried under money and marble floors. I came back down with a glass of ice water. "This is what you came for, right?" And without any warning at all, I threw it directly in her face. The cold water hit her with enough force that her glasses flew off and shattered against my marble floor. "Get out of here, you starving old woman!" I screamed, pointing at the door. "You're nothing to me. You disgust me." My mother stood there trembling, water and tears running down her weathered face together, and picked up her broken glasses from the floor with shaking hands. She turned toward the door, but before she left she looked back at me one final time. "May God forgive you, daughter," she whispered, her voice breaking completely, "because I will always love you no matter what." She walked out of my house with her heart in pieces, and neither of us knew that a man dressed entirely in white had been watching everything from across the street the whole time. A man with eyes full of compassion who was about to deliver justice in a way that would change both our lives forever. My mother walked back through that gated neighborhood like a ghost, water still dripping from her hijab, her broken glasses useless in her trembling hand. She had no money for the bus. She'd have to walk nearly 2 hours back to Hamtramck under the October sun, having not eaten in 2 days, her heart completely shattered. She made it maybe a mile before her legs simply gave out near a bus stop bench on the main road. She grabbed the pole of a street light to keep from collapsing entirely. "God," she whispered, looking up at the gray sky, "I can't do this anymore. If you want to take me now, take me. I don't want to suffer like this any longer." She closed her eyes, waiting for something, anything, to end the unbearable pain. When she opened her eyes again, she saw a man sitting on the bus bench a few feet away, dressed completely in simple white clothing, white pants, a white shirt, sandals, even a plain white cap on his head. His eyes, when he looked at her, were the warmest brown she had ever seen, full of a compassion so deep it nearly undid her right there on the sidewalk. "Are you all right, Mom?" he asked, his voice gentle as running water. My mother wiped her face with her wet sleeve. Yes, I'm just tired." The man stood and walked toward her. There was something about him, an ease, a peace radiating off him that made no sense given everything she'd just survived. "You're hungry," he said. It wasn't a question. My mother, unable to lie under the warmth of his gaze, nodded. "I haven't eaten in 2 days," she admitted, "but I'm all right. I'm on my way home." "Come with me," the man said gently. "There's a place nearby where we can get something to eat." No, sir, I don't have money for." "I'm buying," he said, with a firmness that somehow felt like a kindness rather than a demand. "It would make me happy to share a meal with you." There was something in his voice that made refusing impossible, an authority wrapped completely in tenderness, as though he wasn't asking a favor but offering one. My mother, exhausted, starving, and utterly broken, agreed. They walked 4 blocks together to a small, humble diner near Joseph Campeau called Duke's Coney Island, the kind of place with a faded sign and a counter lined with cracked vinyl stools. But the smell of coney dogs and fresh coffee drifting out the door made my mother's stomach ache with need. Inside, a heavy-set woman named Rosalie, who'd run that counter for 30 years, greeted them with a warm smile. "Sit anywhere you like, hun," she called out. The man in white ordered 2 coney dogs with everything, a bowl of chili and coffee for both of them. When Rosalie brought the steaming plates over, my mother could barely hold herself together. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't know what this means to me." "Before we eat," the man said gently, "may I say a blessing?" My mother nodded. He closed his eyes. "Heavenly Father, thank you for this food. Bless this woman who has suffered so much. Remind her that she is never, ever alone, that you always provide, and that even when the world rejects her, you never will. Amen." "Amen," my mother repeated, her voice cracking. She ate slowly, every bite feeling like a small miracle after 2 days of nothing. "Tell me what happened," the man said after a few minutes, his eyes full of a sorrow that seemed to already know the answer. "Why did you leave that neighborhood crying and soaked to the skin?" My mother hesitated, but something about him made her feel like she could tell him anything without being judged. She told him everything about her husband's death, about the decades of sacrifice, about how her daughter had erased her, and finally about what had just happened in that marble entryway. "She threw water in my face," my mother said. "My own daughter called me a starving old woman and said I disgusted her." The man listened without interrupting, his eyes deepening with sorrow. "And still you love her," he said softly. "It wasn't a question." "Of course I love her," my mother answered simply. "She's my daughter. A mother never stops loving her children even when they hate her." The man nodded slowly. "That is exactly how God loves us," he said. "Even when we reject him, even when we ignore him, even when we treat him with contempt, he is still there, waiting with open arms." "Do you think God still loves me?" my mother asked quietly. "Sometimes I feel like he's forgotten me." "God never forgets his children," the man said, his voice carrying a warmth that felt like it reached into her chest directly. "Not for one single day, not for one single hour." My mother felt a chill move through her. "How do you know my name?" she asked suddenly. "I never told you." The man only smiled and said nothing at all. They finished eating. He paid the bill generously, leaving Rosalie a tip that made her eyes widen. "God bless you both," Rosalie called after them as they left. Outside, the evening light had turned gold and pink over the rooftops of Hamtramck. "I'll walk you home now," the man said. "No, sir. You've already done so much." "I insist," he answered. "It's an honor, not a burden." They walked together through the familiar streets until they reached my mother's small apartment building, worn brick, laundry strung across the balconies, kids playing in the courtyard. "This is where I live," my mother said, gesturing to her door. "May I come in for a moment?" the man asked. My mother, surprised but trusting completely by now, said yes. Inside, her studio apartment held almost nothing: a narrow bed, one wooden chair, a small stove, and a framed page of Quranic calligraphy hanging on the wall beside a photograph of her 3 children as small kids. The man looked at everything with quiet attention, then turned to her. "I want you to make me a promise," he said. "What promise, sir?" "Promise me you won't give up, that even if the world rejects you, even if your own daughter has hurt you, you won't lose your faith, because very soon, you're going to see God's hand move in your life in a way you can't yet imagine." Something stirred in my mother's chest, a spark of hope she thought had gone out completely. "I promise," she whispered. The man smiled and placed his hand gently on her head as if in blessing. God loves you, Rokeya, more than you can understand, and what your daughter did to you today will not go unanswered. Divine justice always arrives. Always. Wait, my mother said as he turned toward the door. I don't even know your name. What do I call you? The man paused in the doorway, the evening light wrapping around him like a halo. He turned back with a smile that seemed to hold every secret of the universe inside it. Some people call me many things, Rokeya, he said, but you can call me friend. And with that, he stepped out and disappeared into the shadows of the courtyard, gone before she could say another word. My mother ran to the door to look for him, but he'd vanished completely, as if he'd simply dissolved into the evening air. That night, for the first time in days, my mother fell asleep with a full stomach, and she dreamed of a man in white who held her and told her again and again, "You are never alone, you never have been." But while my mother slept in peace in that small apartment in Hamtramck, something was about to begin in my own house in Bloomfield Hills, something that would change my life forever. If this story is touching something in you tonight, I want to ask you to do something before we go any further. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the testimonies still to come. And tell me in the comments, have you ever rejected someone who loved you or been rejected by someone you loved? You are not alone in this. Now let's continue. That same night, after throwing my own mother out of my house, I sat across from my husband Craig in our living room, Italian leather sofas, a 75-inch television mounted above the fireplace, marble floors reflecting the recessed lighting like a mirror. "What happened today?" Craig asked without looking up from his tablet. "The guard mentioned your mother came by." My blood ran hot with fresh shame. Yes, she came here begging for food, if you can believe it, right in front of the neighbors. I can already imagine what Mrs. Patterson's going to say about it at the next block party. Craig finally looked up. "What did you do?" "I sent her away, told her not to come back." Craig let out a short laugh. "Cold, babe. She's your mother." "Don't start, Craig. You cut off contact with your whole family after your first divorce. Don't act like a saint." He shrugged and went back to his tablet. Fair enough. Everybody gets to decide who they do and don't want in their life. Your call. I felt validated the way Craig always made me feel, never questioning me, never making me feel guilty, giving me every luxury I could want in exchange for a well-kept house and being left alone. That was our marriage, not love, an arrangement. I went upstairs to our massive primary suite, a closet the size of an apartment, a soaking tub, a rain shower. I ran the water hot and scrubbed myself with an $80 French lavender soap, but something strange kept happening. Even under scalding water, I felt cold, a cold that had nothing to do with temperature. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's face, the water running down her wrinkled cheeks, her glasses shattering on my floor. Her broken voice saying, "May God forgive you, daughter." I opened my eyes hard. "Stop it," I told myself. "I'm not going to feel guilty." She never gave me anything but poverty and shame. I made myself. I scrubbed harder as if I could physically wash the image out of my mind, but it wouldn't leave. I climbed into bed beside Craig, who was already snoring softly, and closed my eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time I drifted close, I heard my mother's voice again. "Daughter, I'm only hungry." I turned over and over again. By 3 in the morning, I was staring at the ceiling with a knot in my stomach I couldn't explain. "It's just guilt," I told myself. "It'll pass." it did not pass. The days that followed were strange in ways I still find hard to fully describe. I tried to go on with my normal life, my private gym, lunch with friends at expensive restaurants, shopping trips to the boutiques in Birmingham, but nothing tasted right anymore. I'd order a $60 entree at some elegant restaurant and it would taste like cardboard in my mouth. My friends talked endlessly about their latest cosmetic procedures, their trips to Europe, their new designer handbags, and I nodded along, smiling, while feeling an emptiness hollow out inside my chest that no amount of money seemed to touch. One evening, after an especially expensive dinner, where Craig and I spent close to $100 on our meals alone, I came home and stood in front of our refrigerator. I opened it. It was packed. Imported cheeses, prosciutto, organic fruit, gourmet desserts, cold-pressed juice at $9 a bottle. And all I could think was, my mother hasn't eaten in who knows how many days. I slammed the refrigerator shut. What is wrong with me? I asked myself out loud. Why can't I stop thinking about her? I tried distracting myself with television, but every show seemed to conspire against me. A mother hugging her daughter in one scene, a happy family sharing a meal in a commercial, an elderly woman crying alone in a movie. I shut the television off hard. My heart was racing. My chest felt tight in a way I couldn't explain. This is ridiculous, I said out loud to my empty living room. I'm not going to feel bad. I didn't do anything wrong. She was never there for me when I needed her. But somewhere underneath that lie, I already knew the truth. My mother had always been there. When I got chickenpox at 7, she stayed awake 3 nights straight, pressing cool cloths to my forehead, feeding me even when there was barely money for her own dinner. When a boy in middle school broke my heart and I cried for days, she held me and said, "You're worth 1,000 of him, my love." When I needed money for college, she worked double and triple shifts, wrecking her own health so I could have an education. She had always been there, and I had thrown a glass of water in her face. That night I couldn't sleep again. Around 4 in the morning, exhausted from tossing and turning, I went down to the kitchen for water. I flipped on the light and froze completely. On my kitchen table sat a folded blue and white printed hijab, the exact one my mother had worn to my wedding. My heart nearly stopped. How did that get here? I hadn't invited her back. I approached it with shaking hands and touched the fabric. It was real, not some trick of my exhausted mind. Underneath it was a note written in handwriting I didn't recognize. A mother's love never dies, even when it is rejected, even when it is trampled. It is always there, waiting. How much longer will you run from your own heart? I dropped the note like it burned me. I looked around wildly. The house was silent. Craig was asleep upstairs. The doors were locked. There was no one else here. "Who left this?" I whispered into the empty kitchen. No answer came, but I felt a presence, watching, not with judgment, but with a sadness that broke something open in my chest. I ran upstairs and pulled the covers over my head like a frightened child. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning I was exhausted, dark circles under my eyes, a headache pounding behind my temples. Craig looked at me with concern over breakfast. "You look terrible. Are you okay?" "I didn't sleep well," I said, barely touching my coffee. "You want me to call the doctor?" "No, I'm fine." But I wasn't fine. Over the following days, strange things kept happening. I'd walk into my enormous closet full of designer clothes and suddenly hear my mother's voice in my mind. "Why don't we ever have a nice house, Mom?" I'd look in the mirror at my perfectly done makeup and see, for just a flash, my mother's face, wet and humiliated. I'd sit down to an expensive meal, and the food would turn to ash in my mouth. One afternoon, I was at the nail salon getting a manicure, something I did every 2 weeks without fail. The young technician doing my nails, a woman named Brianna, asked casually, "Does your mom ever come get her nails done with you?" Something twisted violently in my stomach. "No, I don't," I said quickly. "That would be so sweet," Brianna continued, completely unaware. "My mom passed a few years back. I'd give anything to bring her here just once." I didn't respond. I just pressed my lips together and looked away, but her words lodged themselves in my chest like a blade. I'd give anything to bring her here just once. I had my mother alive, and I had thrown her out into the street. That night, eating dinner alone because Craig was traveling for business, I sat at our massive 12-seat dining table built for dinner parties and stared at the empty chairs around me. My house was enormous, but it had never once felt more hollow. Suddenly, the lights in the house began to flicker. I stood up, alarmed. "Hello," I called out. "Is someone there?" Silence. The flickering stopped, and there, sitting on the sofa where Craig usually sat, was a man dressed completely in white. I screamed and stumbled backward. "Who are you? How did you get into my house?" The man looked at me with eyes full of compassion and something like grief. "Farzana," he said, his voice calm and steady. "We need to talk." "I'm calling the police," I shouted, fumbling for my phone with shaking hands. "Call them if you need to," the man said without moving. "But they won't be able to help you with what's actually happening to you right now." I froze completely. What? What do you want?" The man stood, and when the lamplight caught his face fully, I felt my legs go weak beneath me, because I had seen that face before, in paintings, in the small icon my mother kept in her humble apartment. You can't be." The man smiled with a sadness that seemed to hold the weight of the whole world in it. "Sit down, Farzana," he said gently. "We have a great deal to talk about, and very little time." I sat down across from him, though it felt like I was falling into some other reality entirely. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. My breath came fast and shallow. I could not stop staring at this man who was sitting in my living room, the way you'd stare at something impossible standing right in front of you. "Who are you?" I finally managed to ask, my voice cracking completely. "What do you want from me?" The man leaned forward slightly, his eyes deep and brown, holding what felt like centuries of both sorrow and mercy at once. "I am someone who knows every decision you've ever made, Farzana," he said gently. "Every word you've spoken, every tear you've shed, and every tear you've caused." A chill went straight down my spine. No, I don't understand. You're a hallucination. I'm losing my mind." The man shook his head slowly. "You are not losing your mind. This is real as the pain you caused your mother a few days ago." At the word mother, something inside me cracked wide open. "How do you know?" I whispered. "I saw everything," the man said, his voice firm but without a trace of anger in it. "I saw you throw water in her face. I saw you call her a starving old woman. I saw you say she disgusted you. And I also saw something you didn't see." "What?" I asked, my voice barely a thread of sound. "I saw her leave your house with her heart in pieces. I saw her walk for nearly 2 hours under the sun, having not eaten in 2 days. I saw her collapse against a lamppost and ask God to take her, because she couldn't bear the pain any longer. Tears began pouring down my face without my permission. I didn't. And I also saw the man continued. How that same woman you wanted to see dead in the street, when she finally made it home that night, knelt in front of a picture in her small apartment and prayed. Do you know what she asked God for? I shook my head, unable to speak. She asked him to bless you, he said, to protect you, to give you health and happiness, not one single word of anger, not one curse, only pure, unconditional love. The tears were flowing freely now, ruining my makeup, staining my silk pajamas. Why are you telling me this? I sobbed. Who are you? The man stood, and the light in the room seemed to intensify around him, like it was coming from inside his own skin. I am someone who understands the value of a mother, he said, because I had one too. A humble, simple woman who loved me unconditionally. And I know what maternal sacrifice looks like, because I watched it in my own mother's eyes when the world rejected me because of who I am. I stared at him, terror mixing now with something else entirely. Recognition. No, it can't be. The man extended his hands toward me, and on his wrists I saw something that made me cry out loud, marks, scars, old and healed, but unmistakable. Jesus, I whispered, sinking to my knees on my own marble floor. You're Jesus. He nodded slowly. Yes, Farzana, it's me. And I came because your mother called me. Not with words, with tears. And a mother's tears always, always reach heaven. I began sobbing uncontrollably, my whole body shaking. Forgive me, I didn't know. Didn't know what? Jesus asked, his voice firm but full of grace. That your mother went without food so you could eat? That she worked until her body broke down to pay for your education? That she stayed up nights when you were sick as a child? Or did you know and choose to ignore it anyway? I couldn't speak. I only cried. Jesus knelt down to meet me at eye level, looking directly into my eyes. Farzana, I'm going to show you something you need to see to understand the weight of what you've done. He touched my forehead gently, and suddenly everything changed. I was no longer in my living room. I was standing on a street I recognized instantly, Joseph Campau in Hamtramck. But it wasn't the present, it was the past. I saw my mother, so much younger, maybe 40 years old, leaving our old apartment before dawn, carrying a cooler of paita and samosas and a bag of cleaning supplies. I followed her, invisible, like a ghost in my own memory. I watched her arrive at an enormous house in Grosse Pointe. I watched her kneel for hours scrubbing floors on her hands and knees. I watched her scrub toilets, haul heavy buckets of water, her knees bleeding through her stockings by the end of the day. When that job ended, instead of going home to rest, she rushed to another house to do laundry, then another to iron, then home to make food to sell the next morning. She worked 16 hours straight, and when she finally came home late at night, she entered a cramped little apartment where 3 children slept crowded onto one mattress. I saw myself there, maybe 12 years old, asleep, curled against my brothers. My mother came in quietly, careful not to wake us, and tucked a worn blanket around our shoulders. Then she knelt beside the bed and began praying softly. God, thank you for this day. Thank you for giving me strength to work. I ask you to bless my children. Let them never go hungry. Let them get an education. Let them have a better future than mine. I don't matter, but they do. Protect them, Lord. Protect them. Watching this, I began sobbing uncontrollably. Mom, I whispered, but the scene shifted. Now I was in college, watching myself at 20, sitting in the cafeteria, laughing with friends over coffee. My phone rang. It was my mother. In the memory, young me looked at the screen with irritation and declined the call. Who was that? One of my friends asked. Nobody important, young me answered dismissively. Watching from outside myself, I felt a knife go straight through my chest. The scene shifted again. Now I was in a hospital. My mother, around 50, lay on a gurney in the emergency room, her face pale, her lips tinged blue. Doctors spoke of dangerously high blood pressure, uncontrolled diabetes, kidneys damaged from years of relentless overwork. I saw myself walk in, maybe 22, dressed expensively, carrying a designer bag. "What happened?" I asked the doctor. "Your mother collapsed at work. She's very weak. She needs complete rest, or her body isn't going to survive much longer." Young me nodded, walked to the gurney, patted my mother's hand, and said, "Take care, Mom. I have to go. I have an important meeting." And I left. I left her alone in that hospital. The scene shifted one final time. I was at my own wedding, the elegant ballroom at the country club, hundreds of guests, flowers that cost more than most people's monthly rent, gourmet catering. My mother sat alone at a table near the back, dressed in her best, which still looked humble next to the other guests' gowns. Nobody spoke to her. Nobody approached her all night. I, dressed in white, passed that table several times throughout the celebration and never once stopped to talk to my own mother. Not once. At the end of the night, when the party was ending, my mother approached me shyly. "Farzana, my love, you look beautiful. God bless your marriage." I barely glanced at her. "Thanks. The car will take you home. Good night." And I turned back to my important guests. Watching myself do that, I collapsed to my knees, sobbing. "Enough, please, enough." Suddenly I was back in my own living room. Jesus stood in front of me, his eyes full of infinite compassion but also firmness. "Do you understand now?" he asked. "Do you see what you've done?" I could barely breathe through my sobs. I was a terrible daughter, the worst daughter in the world. "You were a daughter who forgot where she came from," Jesus corrected gently. "A daughter who traded love for ambition, gratitude for pride, her heart for her image." "What can I do?" I cried. "How can I fix this?" Jesus sat down beside me. "The first step is recognizing you're wrong, and you've already done that. The second step is harder." "What is it?" "Humble yourself. Go to your mother. Ask her forgiveness on your knees, not just with words, but with actions. Show her that the love she poured into you your whole life wasn't wasted." "I'll do it," I promised desperately. "I'll go tomorrow morning. I'll beg her forgiveness. I'll give her everything I have, my house, my money, everything." Jesus shook his head. "Your mother doesn't want your money, Farzana. She never did. All she has ever wanted is your love, your presence, to be seen as your mother, not as an inconvenience." "I'll do it," I promised. "I swear I'll change. I'll be different." Jesus looked at me steadily. "Good, because your mother doesn't have much time left." My heart stopped completely. What do you mean?" "Your mother is very sick, Farzana. Advanced diabetes, kidney failure beginning, blood pressure that could take her life at any moment. Years of overwork and stress have destroyed her body. If you don't get her real help soon, you're going to lose her." I felt the whole world collapse around me. No, it can't be. How much time does she have?" Jesus stood. "That depends on many things. But I'll tell you this. Every day that passes without her receiving your love, proper medical care, and real support is a day less of life she has left." He moved toward the door. "Wait, don't go," I begged, scrambling to my feet. "Help me. Tell me what to do." Jesus turned back one last time. "I already told you what to do. The rest is up to you. You have a chance at redemption. Use it wisely. Because second chances don't always come twice. And with that, he vanished, dissolving into the air like smoke. I stood alone in my enormous empty living room, shaking, sobbing, feeling for the first time in years the true weight of everything I had done. I looked at the clock. It was 2:30 in the morning. I couldn't wait until daylight. I had to go now. I threw on jeans and a sweatshirt and grabbed my car keys. I drove out of my gated neighborhood into the night, toward Hamtramck, toward the small apartment where my mother lived, my heart pounding, one single thought consuming my mind. Would I make it in time? My white Mercedes cut through the empty streets of Detroit at 3 in the morning. My hands trembled on the wheel. Tears wouldn't stop running down my face, blurring my vision. Please, God, I kept whispering, please don't let it be too late. Please. I had never in my whole life prayed with such desperation. I reached Hamtramck in under 20 minutes, driving faster than I should have, running 2 red lights I barely even registered. I parked in front of my mother's apartment building. It looked even more worn down at night, the streetlights flickering unevenly, a stray dog barking somewhere in the distance. I got out and ran toward the building, my expensive sneakers splashing through puddles I didn't even notice. I found her door, a faded green door, apartment 3 on the ground floor. I remembered it vaguely from the one time I'd visited years before. I knocked desperately. Mom, open up, it's me, Farzana. Silence. I knocked again, harder. Mom, please, I need to talk to you. Nothing. Panic began rising in my chest. What if I was too late? What if she'd already? Then a light flicked on inside. I heard slow, heavy footsteps approaching. The door opened and there stood my mother, but not the same woman I'd thrown out of my house days earlier. She looked even thinner now, more fragile, deep shadows under her eyes, her skin pale and almost gray. She held onto the doorframe as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. And still, when she saw me standing there crying, her eyes lit up with a mixture of shock and hope. "Is that you, daughter?" she whispered weakly. I couldn't hold back any longer. I threw myself into her arms and began sobbing like I hadn't cried since I was a little girl. "Forgive me, Mom. Forgive me. I was a horrible daughter. I treated you like garbage. I threw you out of my house. I threw water in your face. Forgive me, please." My mother, despite her weakness, wrapped her arms around me with whatever strength she had left. My daughter, I was so cruel to you too," she sobbed. "You gave me everything. You sacrificed your whole life for me, and I repaid you with contempt and humiliation." She stroked my hair the way she used to when I was small. "Shh, my love, you're here now. That's what matters. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't deserve to call you my mother." My mother pulled back gently to look me in the eyes, her own eyes brimming with tears. "Listen to me carefully, Farzana. You will always be my daughter. Always. It doesn't matter what you've done. It doesn't matter how much you've hurt me. A mother's love never runs out." I fell to my knees right there on her threshold. "Forgive me, Mom. I beg you, forgive me." My mother knelt too, ignoring the pain in her swollen joints. "I forgive you, daughter. I forgave you the moment you walked out of my house because that's how God forgives us, before we even ask." We held each other there on the cold floor of that hallway, crying, healing together. After a few minutes, I helped her stand and we went inside. The reality of how my mother had been living hit me like a physical blow. The tiny studio held almost nothing. A narrow bed, one chair, a hot plate, a framed page of Arabic calligraphy on the wall. The walls showed water stains. It was cold. "Mom?" I looked around in horror. "You live like this?" My mother nodded with a sad smile. "It's small, but it's home." My chest felt like it was splitting open. I lived in a 5-bedroom mansion while my mother lived in a room barely big enough for one bed. "This ends today," I said firmly. "You're coming to live with me, starting right now." My mother shook her head gently. "Daughter, I don't want to be a burden to you." "You are not a burden," I said, taking her hands in mine. "You never were. I was the one who was ungrateful. But that's over now. You're coming home with me and we're taking you to see a doctor, the best one in the city. I'm going to take care of you the way you took care of me my whole life." My mother began crying again, but these were tears of joy this time. "Daughter, you don't know what it means to hear you say this." "I should have said it years ago," I answered, holding her. "I wasted so much time being proud and foolish, but I promise I'm going to make it up to you. I swear it to God." At that exact moment, I felt a presence. I turned toward the doorway, and there he was, the man in white, Jesus, standing in the entrance, smiling with a look of pure love and approval. My mother saw him too, and her eyes went wide. "It's you," she gasped. "You're the man who bought me dinner that day." Jesus nodded. "Yes, Rokeya, it's me." My mother sank to her knees. "Lord, is it really you?" Jesus stepped inside, and his presence filled that small space with a warm light that seemed to come from within himself. "Yes, my daughter, it's me." I fell to my knees too, trembling completely. Jesus came close and placed a hand on each of our heads. "Rokeya, your faith and your unconditional love have been heard in heaven. You were never, ever alone. Every tear you shed was gathered. Every prayer was heard, and today your reward has arrived." He turned to me. "And you, Farzana, you took the most important step, humbling yourself and recognizing your wrong. This is the beginning of your transformation. But remember, actions weigh more than words. Show your mother with real deeds that this change is real." "I will, Lord. I promise through my tears. I swear it." Jesus smiled. "I know you will, and I want you both to know something else." "What, Lord?" my mother asked. "I need to tell you plainly what I've believed my whole life without fully understanding it. I was raised to see Isa as a great prophet, honored above almost anyone, born of Mariam, a healer, a messenger of God, but never as more than that. Standing here in front of you, feeling what I feel, I don't believe that's the whole truth anymore. I believe you are exactly who you told my mother you were that day on the bench, Lord, not a prophet only." My mother looked at me, tears streaming, and then back at Jesus. "I have believed the same thing all my life," she said quietly, "and I've been afraid to say it out loud, even to myself. But sitting in that diner with you and standing here now, I don't have room left in my heart to call you only a prophet either." Jesus looked at both of us with a tenderness that filled the entire room. "You don't have to carry that fear anymore, either of you. The truth doesn't need you to be brave enough to say it first. It only needs you to be honest. And you both already are. Your mother is not going to die, Farzana," Jesus continued. "I'm going to heal her because her faith is great and her love is pure. She will live many more years, and she will live them surrounded by the love of her daughter and her family." My mother began crying uncontrollably. "Thank you, Lord, thank you." Jesus helped us both to our feet. "Now go together and build a new story, a story of love, forgiveness, and reconciliation, because that is what moves heaven, love that forgives and restores." He moved toward the door. I called after him, "Lord, Will we see you again? Jesus turned one final time. I am always with you, in every act of love, in every gesture of kindness, in every act of forgiveness. That is where you will find me. And he disappeared into the night. My mother and I stood there holding each other, feeling a peace neither of us had felt in years. Let's go home, Mom, I said. To our home. Yes, daughter, let's go home. 3 months after that night, both of us were baptized together in a small church not far from Hamtramck. My mother first, then me, the pastor's hands trembling slightly as he lowered each of us into the water because we'd told him enough of our story that he understood exactly what he was witnessing. My mother wept through the whole service. So did I. We had spent our whole lives honoring Isa from a careful distance, and now, for the first time, we were choosing him without any distance left at all. The days that followed were about total transformation. I took my mother to the best hospital in the city. They confirmed everything Jesus had told us: advanced type 2 diabetes, stage 2 kidney failure, dangerously high blood pressure, but with the right treatment, the right nutrition, and above all, the love and care of her daughter. My mother began to heal. I prepared one of our guest rooms just for her, filled it with fresh flowers, soft sheets, a television, and most importantly, I spent hours there every single day just talking with her, really getting to know her for the first time in my adult life. I asked about her childhood, her dreams, the sacrifices she'd made, and with every story she told me, I understood more fully everything I had lost by rejecting her all those years. 3 weeks after she moved in, I hosted a dinner. I invited the same neighbors who had seen her humiliated that terrible day. When they arrived, they saw my mother seated at the head of my dining table, dressed elegantly in a dress I'd bought her hair done, looking healthy and radiant. This is my mother, I told them proudly. The bravest, strongest, most loving woman I know. And I want you all to know that everything I am, everything I have, exists because of her. The neighbors, some of whom had witnessed her humiliation firsthand, were stunned into silence. My mother smiled through tears. 2 years later, Craig and I converted part of our house into a temporary shelter for people without homes. My mother, fully recovered and full of energy, ran it alongside me. We fed 30 people every single day, gave them clothes, helped them find work, offered them hope, and every time someone new arrived, my mother told her story. Of the day her own daughter rejected her, of the man in white who fed her when no one else would, of how Jesus transformed both of their lives forever, and every person who heard that story left with tears in their eyes and a renewed certainty that God never abandons his children, that love always overcomes hatred, that forgiveness is always possible, and that Jesus still walks among us, disguised as strangers, as the hungry, as the elderly, waiting to see if we recognize him, waiting to see if we feed him, waiting to see if we love him. One Sunday afternoon, while my mother and I served food at the shelter, a man in humble clothing approached the line, tall, long hair, worn sandals. When it was his turn, I served him a hot plate. He looked at me and smiled, and in that smile I saw something familiar, a light, a peace, an infinite love. "Thank you," he said softly. "It's an honor to serve you," I answered. He took his plate and sat at a table in the back. My mother, who'd been watching, came over to me. "Did you see him, daughter?" "Yes, Mom. I saw him. Do you think it was?" "Yes," I said, tears in my eyes. "I think it was." We both turned toward that back table, but the man was gone. His plate sat there empty as though he'd eaten, but he had vanished completely. My mother and I held each other, crying with joy and gratitude because we knew the truth. Jesus never left our lives, and he never leaves anyone's. He's only waiting for us to open our eyes, waiting for us to open our hearts, waiting for us to recognize that everyone who suffers is him, and when we serve the smallest of these, we are serving him. Now, dear friend, I want to ask you something from the bottom of my heart. Is there someone in your life you've rejected, someone you've turned your back on, your parents, your siblings, a friend who needed you? It's not too late. Jesus still works miracles. Jesus still transforms hearts. Jesus still restores families, but he needs you to take the first step, to humble yourself, to ask forgiveness, to open your heart. And if you've been the one rejected, the way my mother was, I want you to know God has not forgotten you. He sees every tear. He hears every prayer. And in the perfect moment, he will send help. Maybe not in the way you expect, maybe not in the time you want, but it always comes, because God's love is eternal and his justice is perfect. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to this channel so you can keep hearing real testimonies of how Jesus is still working miracles today. Tell me in the comments, what would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever rejected someone who loved you or been rejected by someone you love? Your story matters, and Jesus wants to write a new chapter in it, a chapter of love, forgiveness, and restoration. May Jesus walk with you today and in every day that is still ahead of you. Amen.